Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're going to be doing another mini painting in my sketchbook. I'm going to be painting a nice summery scene. So I'm going to be painting from a photo, and the scene is basically a pathway on a nice sunny day. This photo has a lot of contrast in it. We might lighten up the shadows a little bit and try to imagine it maybe a little bit more what it would feel like to actually be there. I'm thinking of the rule of thirds in my head. So I'm imagining a little bit of a grid here where there might be an axis somewhere around here. And so I'm going to kind of imagine that this pathway is leading up towards that axis, and that can be sort of the vanishing point that it's moving towards. I'm sorry if my sketch isn't very, very visible right now. I like to sketch pretty lightly because I don't really like the sketch lines to be in the finished piece. A lot of times things end up changing a bit and I don't necessarily follow my sketch 100%, but it helps me to have a starting point. All right, so time to get going with the paints. I'm going to use a spray bottle here and just spritz the paints that I already have on my palette. We've got light blue, dark green, light green. You know, these will reactivate at least well enough to use for this background wash layer. A couple of the colors that I know I might use more of in the background, I might put some fresh paint on right now. Also, there's a color that I didn't use the other day that I think I'd like to use here, so I'm gonna add that. And that is a Winsor & Newton color, Cobalt Turquoise Light. I really like this one. I like to use it in situations where we have some bounce light on the leaves. Put a little bit of fresh leaf green. So hopefully we'll maybe use a little paint in this process, but some fresh paint too. And I'm also going to wet the canvas, or well, the paper. So I'm gonna use a large brush with some clean water and just go right over here. And then I usually will wait a little bit and let that soak into the paper. So let me show you, I have another camera view here. Maybe it'll give a better view of the water. I'm gonna let that soak in a little bit more, but I think it's looking pretty good. We don't want any large amounts of water pooling on the surface, just want it to be wet. So I'm gonna start with a large round brush. I usually use pretty big brushes for the background layers. Let me grab some of that leaf green. And I like to paint very loose in the background. And I really usually start with like the light colors, and I want a glowy look to what I'm painting back here, because this is it's not truly an underpainting, but it's a base layer that I'm gonna show through to a little bit. So as we paint, there's gonna be more and more layers and more, some opaque painting too that will cover up a lot of this. But there will be some little areas where I'll want to still show through to this even at the end, I think, hopefully, if I don't go overboard and paint away too much. I think it'll be nice to have some of these really luminous light green areas. One of the reasons that I like to paint in this way now is I really love the glowy light, the effect of subsurface scattering, of light shining through leaves. And light in general, and painting scenes with sort of magical, beautiful lighting is, for me, one of the most inspiring things as a painter. And when I'm out and spending time in nature and I see these kind of scenes, this is kind of what gets me going and wanting to paint. It has a lot to do with light. So I started finding that when I painted a little bit more in a watercolor style, I felt like it helped make my paintings a bit more luminous. So I could achieve better glowy effects this way. I still love opaque painting and layering, and I will get into that as the painting gets, further along in the process. But I find it really, really useful to kind of combine those two ideas, and that's what I love about gouache. It's so versatile. You can do transparent painting and then opaque painting in the same painting. All right, next I want to, on the path, I have a little bit of burnt sienna here and a little bit of white that's reactivated. And I think I'm gonna put this right here on the path. I like getting these colors in while there's still like a possibility for wet blending there. I think it looks really nice when the edges are very soft and you actually don't really see a harsh line between the different colors. I think that can be really nice. And so we'll move more to a shadowy color. So we get towards the foreground. This is gonna be in shadow and there's definitely gonna be warm spots. But we'll probably put another layer over there with like the harsher shadows. And see right there, having these two colors real close together and letting them blend in so there's a soft edge between them. So in this scene, there may be a situation where I leave some white paper, and I usually don't do that, but the sky is really bright up here, and it's one of those situations where, I mean, we know the sky would actually be blue, but with how bright the light is, it makes sense to basically, for me, I think to leave it white, I think will give the better glowy feeling. Right here, this is distant foliage. I mean, it's not too far away, but further down the path. So I'm using a light blue to kind of push that into the distance and make it look like there's a little bit more atmosphere between these leaves and what's back there. I'll go with a little darker green. That was a bit too much water. Might need to switch to a smaller brush. Okay, what's next? So here in the photo, we have some nice purple shadows on the path. I love this effect, like purple blue kind of look. I think I am gonna switch to a smaller brush for this. Maybe a little too much water there too. But every one of these paintings is a learning experience. I try to remind myself that so that it encourages me to be brave and try things, because sometimes when I'm painting and I think, oh, maybe I could try adding this there or that there, and then I also get the feeling of, oh, well, I like how the painting's going, I don't want to mess it up or something, and then sometimes that discourages me from trying stuff. So I'm trying to remind myself that this little book is a good place to try new things and, you know, observe how things go and learn from that, but it's okay to make mistakes. Like this whole area here, to be honest, I think that was just too much water. I think it will work out just fine. But, you know, if I'm gonna be a perfectionist, I think there was a little too much water. So we could, you know, dry off the brush a little bit, clean it, dry it, and then kind of press down and soak up some of that. That's possible. But the great thing with gouache is you can really fix almost anything. There's, you know, a lot of flexibility. You can layer things, you can lift things. So put a little bit of that warmer color back in. We'll wait for this to dry and we can do another layer, and I think it'll work out just fine in the end. Okay. All right, so for me, I think this first layer is just about done. So I'm going to grab the hairdryer and dry this so we can speed through that and keep going. I'm going to clean off a little area here on my palette. We've got a few colors coming together here. I want to clean up the bottom a little bit. I think it might be good to just take a look at that before we go on. So we're just cleaning off a little area, and we're mainly going to be using white, a little bit of that burnt sienna, and just coming back in here. The brightest areas in the photo are the sky up here where there's like white shining through, and then right here there's a really intense lighting right on the path right here. So I want it to be warm color but light. Oh, the color mix is almost the same as what's there. Okay, thought it was gonna be a little brighter, but this is fine. So I'm going to start with this, and then we'll add some white to it, like a little bit more pure white. Okay, so it's already looking a little bit cleaner and nicer. Just get some fresh white paint there. This should be very opaque. And there we go. Maybe I can show on a little zoom here so you can see up close. So it helps me to take the time to do this now before getting into some other areas, to fix that, because it felt like a values issue, when I'm talking about values, the darks and lights, the shadows and highlights in the image, and when that aspect is not working, I find it really hard to visualize the whole piece and to carry on with that. So this was creating a values issue, this being too dark. So lightening that up and fixing that early on was kind of important, because now I feel like the whole scene is making more sense already, and I can visualize better what I need to do next. And now we need to bring some shadows up here and keep going that way. So we've got a little splash of light hitting in the distance here. As you get further and further away, you're getting sort of a distorted view. So this little highlight streak across the path is going to be a very thin little streak. So that helps to make it look like it's getting further and further away. And if we were to put one last one back here, which might be honestly going too far with detail, I would want to keep it like one little tiny sliver like that, just not going too thick with the brush stroke. It has to be very thin little line. And of course getting smaller as well when it comes to width. All right, next layer, we're going to do something with this tree, I think. So one thing that I see very subtly in the photo is like a little bit of bounce light. I mean, you can barely see it, but there's a little bit of green light reflecting on the tree. So I think I'm going to start off with a light brown with a bit of green and try to capture that feeling of bounce light here. So I'm just going to start. Let's just go for it. The tree in the photo is not nearly as light as this, but it's our painting. We can take some artistic, interpretation. And for me, I would like this to be a little lighter just so we can bring some interesting colors in. So this dark brown here, some blue. So I like when I paint trees that are like partially illuminated, to paint with two colors and just let them flow together like this to kind of create that gradient in between the side that's more lit up and then the shadow side. So just bringing in the darker brown And then also, I think it's nice, let's take like a dark green here, and we can make a soft transition between the bottom of the tree and the surrounding foliage. I'm gonna clean off my brush, just get some clean water on there, and then go right around the bottom and just make a little stroke with the water so that that will subtly fade out down there. Okay, so I've got a bunch of interesting branches up here. I'm going to try my best to paint at least the same type of branches as what this tree actually has in the photo, but I'm not going to stress too much about painting every single branch exactly how it is. I'm just going to look at generally how the shapes work. There's a lot of branches up at the top. Kind of like overlapping and spreading out in all different directions. So while the branches are wet, I'd like to be able to add some leaves and get some soft transitions there too. So I've got to move a little bit quickly on the branches or else they'll dry completely before I'm able to do that. So let's just do some real quick at least, and then I can add more. We can add more leaves. So I'm just going to grab some of this. This is a permanent green deep. It's dried here. I'm just trying to reactivate them. Mix it with a little bit with that burnt umber. And then here in the center, closer to the tree trunk and the central branches, there's a lot of shadow in the photo. I'm just gonna bring this darker green in there. I just want to be careful. I do want to leave little pops of that bright green, that base layer. And then take some of this blue, maybe some of the brown. I just want there to be enough dark values. I do want it to look shaded, but I don't want it to look boring and just, you know, shadow without color. So we want to keep a lot of colors going on in the shadows, but still allow it to get darker there. So that's what I'm working on. Oops, I grabbed a bit more of that than I wanted. Let's try again. And so as we come down here, there's a little bit more bright green leaves and light shining through. Get some more of this permanent green deep up at the top. Okay, over on this right side is where I want to try to be extra careful because there's more lighter greens showing through on the right side of the tree over here. So I don't want to cover that too much. We can always add more dark. And technically, because it's gouache, we can always add lighter color on top too. But it doesn't always have the same look when you're painting in the light color versus here where it's that transparent or initial wash. There's a little bit of a difference in the luminosity when you have to add the color back in later. So that's why I'm trying to get it to work well the first time. And if we need to add some of those highlights back in, it's no problem. But that is why I'm sort of making an effort to leave some of them. So there's an interesting thing happening here value-wise in the photo. As we get lower with these branches, the light is shining through them. So we've got the darker leaves up here, lighter leaves down here, and then there's this situation where behind them, this distant foliage is darker. So right now it's lighter. So it's like, this is a situation where I have to say, do I paint it different from the reference? Or should I follow it? And it's hard to say because I think it could work like this. So we've just changed the scene and it could also work. But I'm curious if it would look good if this was darker because it would really pop those highlights around this edge. So in the spirit of experimenting, I think I will try to darken it back there and see what it looks like. So we'll go with this color, maybe a little bit of this aqua. I'm gonna try to be a little careful and water it down a bit. But we need to darken this. We want to try this out. So here's the plan, and then we leave like a little bit of light in between. And maybe I should go even darker, grab some of this blue. There's like a tree and some other stuff, so maybe we can do some blurry details like that. Just make it look like there's some blurry stuff going on. Can't really make it out because it's a little farther away. And then that dark area kind of reaches all the way over. Maybe I'll put a little bit on the other side too. I think it's working okay. I'm gonna have some areas, little areas cut through that shape, those shapes, these leaves grouped up. Maybe a little bit over here. Okay, I think it worked. Successful experiment. Cool. I think I'm going to use the hairdryer real quick, dry that layer, that area we just did, and then we will carry on. Okay, so the painting is dry, and I just wanted to take a couple moments and think about what the next steps should be before we dive right in. That's something I'm trying to work on. So let me point out a couple things that I think I want to do next. Here, this little mound, this is going to be some little foliage and wildflowers and things growing here going into the distance, and I want it to feel a little bit more 3D, and like right now it looks flat, but I want to give some shading to this side as it comes towards us. The light is going to be hitting here, so this top part will stay bright, and hopefully that'll give more dimension here. And then here on the right, I initially sketched in a tree that was going to come up a little bit higher and kind of like tangle with this one a little bit, but I think looking at this now and how it's kind of, I feel like maybe there should be more of a bush and maybe should stop here. We can still give a trunk and stem and branches and stuff, but I think maybe we shouldn't go up and get involved with this too much because I feel like it's kind of working there. We'll see. Maybe a couple little branches, but not as high as I'd originally planned. So I think that's what I want to do, and then darken here, have some of the shadows and dappled light, have a little bit more contrast here. And as far as focal point, just thinking about what is the focal point, the leading lines are bringing us here. So this is probably going to end up being the focal point. Maybe something we can do to make it a little bit more interesting is have a couple leaves sort of like pointing down. We already have this happening a little bit, but maybe put a couple bright green leaves just pointing down into that spot. maybe a couple plants sticking up a little higher, just give more interest here. Right here, there's going to be some high contrast, hopefully some leaves coming in front of this area. So that's the plan. When we actually get into it, we'll see what happens. But it's good to think about and ask ourselves these questions. Sometimes I get so in the flow and I'm, having a good time, but I'm not critically thinking as much as I need to be while I paint. I'm trying to think about that. And it helps to sometimes actually stop completely painting while you're thinking and then get back into it. So, okay, let's start the next step. This is a very transparent color we're using here. I just kind of want to slowly build this up because the differences between values here in this area are going to be maybe kind of subtle, and it's nice to take it slow and work up to the right color. So there we go, fading into the distance there. And I think that's working. And then here we're gonna have some really bright greens popping in front. And then as we get closer here, actually let me show also, we're gonna be working in this area. So take some of that darker green. And again, I want light up at the top. So just gonna make a couple darker areas and then have the edges have some little leaf shapes. It's too much water. I think I could use a bigger brush, honestly. So this needs to be pretty dark, the shadows. Actually at the base of the tree. So we can do another layer on this tree going up. And we can make some sort of vertical lines going up the tree as we're painting, so we don't have to fill it all in completely, but that'll start giving a little hint of, tree bark or something like that, the patterns on the tree. So I want to think about how this is going to meet up with the pathway, because I'd like to have some soft edges there too. So I'm going to put in some lighter greens because there are some little highlights. Okay, we've got to be bold again here. It's a little scary, but we're gonna do it. Okay, let's go for it. So I want kind of horizontal little dashes and dots for these shadows. I'm trying to make it feel natural. I don't want to put them all like evenly spaced, but for some reason it's very easy to start doing that. It's like your brain likes to make patterns. I'm trying to fight that and put them in little groupings and then put larger spaces. And just make it look more random, not everything's equally spaced. this area is a bit too, I need to like elongate the shape a little bit more. Okay, and we're gonna get a little further away up here. So I'm gonna go with a lighter color and smaller dashes if I can. Maybe I need to go back to that smaller brush now. Oops, I've got a big droplet, water droplet on my brush. You gotta be careful. So smaller little dashes in the distance. I like that really saturated burnt sienna. So just in a couple places to really have that color pop. I think it's nice. Okay, back to the larger brush. I only like to use tiny brushes when I really have to. I prefer to use larger brushes. It just feels more natural. I feel like I can do better organic shapes with the larger brushes. Okay, yeah, this whole area is going to be pretty dark by the time it gets all the way down to the foreground. So I'll just make that darker, and maybe we could even drop in a couple darker shadows in this corner. All right, and let's look at the right side. So I want to put some branches coming up here. Hope I can make some interesting shapes. I might have to just get a smaller brush again, but let's start with the main trunk shape. Try to maybe keep it a little sketchy, look organic, and you know, not every branch is perfect. So I think something like that can be interesting. Add some shadows, so I'm grabbing the blue, green, and so some of these branches are going to kind of get dissolved into the shadows, but that's what I'm seeing in the photo too, is not a lot of detail. You're not able to see a lot of detail in the shadows there. You can kind of make out what's going on, but a lot of the information is kind of lost. So, okay, and let's get a lighter green maybe and sort of transition as we get to the outer edge. And there can be little light areas in the middle too. There's a lot of light shining through. I think that looks really pretty in the photo. Okay, maybe some little dappled light there. And then we also have to think about, sort of like what we did on this side going to the distance, we have to think about that here. It's a bit tricky. on this side because it's very like squished and foreshortened from our angle. It's really hard to see what's going on. So I'm gonna try not to overthink it and just put some shadows. Maybe it needs more blue, I think. I just want some leaves at the edge here. Just want to make the edge a little bit more interesting. So we've got a lot in here that can't really tell what's going on. So I definitely want some shapes here to just say like, hey, this is a bush, these are leaves. Don't worry about what's going on in here. Okay, and down here, a lot of chaos in the photo. So we're just gonna keep it dark. Most of it's in shadow. We'll be able to add some highlights back in too. That's a great thing with gouache. So at the end, we can come in and add some little plants reaching out into the sunlight or something like that. We need to give them a little bit of a base here with this shadow colors. And then we can have some interesting little individual details. Okay, I think we're almost at another point where I might pause to do some drawing. Okay, let's do that. Let me try this and then we'll assess where we are. So what are we gonna do to finish this off? The top still needs a lot of work. There's very unfinished areas. So up through here, need to do some work. Maybe adding some little highlights coming down here, but I wanna be careful because I feel like in a lot of ways it's working. It's just, it needs some more detail, but we need to add detail without drastically changing like how the values are working and things like that. So I also want to add some little details, like little leaves maybe peeking out from the shadows here. Maybe not all the way on the edge, but maybe just a couple here near the tree would be good. The tree itself I feel like is going okay. It's a bit simple. There's not a lot of detail there, but maybe that's fine. I guess we'll just have to get into it and see how it goes. But mainly we're about to just get started with the top half of the painting and work on the leaves up there. So I have some green with a bit of brown mixed in, so it's a little bit more of an earthy color. And I'm just gonna bring that in. A good amount of water in this mixture. So I still wanna keep that feeling of luminosity up here and glow. So I'm using still pretty transparent color right now. And I'm just looking at the reference picture to see where there are leaves sort of bunched up and lots of leaves overlapping to the point where you start to see a little bit less light showing through. And then that's where I'm working right now to try to make some of these little groupings. So just lots of little taps with the brush. Kind of make some groupings of leaves coming down here. But this is where I want to be careful because one of the things that I really love about this image and the photo is that these leaves down here are really, really bright. the subsurface scattering is very strong. There's a lot of light shining through, so I don't want to get rid of that. I gotta add detail, but keep the glow. So that's what we're trying to do here. I'm using Holbein Leaf Green right now. Love that color. Such a beautiful, like, springtime green color. I love it. This is one of the colors that I always like to have on hand when I'm running low. I always have to get a new tube of this color. And it's this one right here. Oops. This one right here, the leaf green. Love that one. I'm gonna water the paint down a bit more up at the top here. It's like I just want to give a little bit of texture almost here, instead of having just that wash, that one color with nothing going on. Just a little, you know, it's not much, but just a little bit of texture to just make it feel like something's going on. It's, you know, maybe leaves far away and there's a few layers. Same thing here, just a little bit of texturing. And now we're gonna go to a darker green, got the permanent green deep. I have a lighter green up here. This is a Winsor Newton color. This is permanent green light. So I feel like it kind of makes sense to follow the shape, you know, follow these branches. Trying to find the right color here. I keep going back to my palette because I don't feel like I have the right color yet. That feels a little bit better. I had to mute that out a little bit. There's just a couple areas up here where the leaves get really dark just because there's so many layers overlapping. We do need that contrast. We just don't want to go too far everywhere, but a couple places to have that dark shadow makes the lighter areas look even more bright. That is something really helpful when I finally started to understand that, because you know, when you want to paint something shiny or glittery or luminous, it's really important to have the high contrast and to have areas that are really bright and also areas that are really dark. And that second part is what I was missing for a while, you know? You try to make everything bright because you want to make it really, really glowy. But in the end, you've got to have those dark areas too. And that's what makes the light areas really stand out, and that you really feel that the little pops of these light areas coming through. Also gonna do continuation of that layer over here. This is the darkest area in the reference. kind of repetitive, this part of the process. So not too much to say here, just kind of filling in these areas, looking at the photo for, trying to find ways to maybe group some of these areas a little bit. What I don't want is to sort of fill in the same exact pattern over and over at the top of this, which is hard because it really is a lot of similar looking stuff going on. But I want it to feel organic and natural. So I'm just looking at the photo and trying to see if there's any interesting, details I can include that would make it feel more realistic. And when I say realistic, I don't necessarily mean like highly detailed, looking like a photo or anything like that, but realistic in like natural and just kind of looking at how the leaves are grouped and how the branches, shapes work. And is there anything like that I need to fix or add in? Like there's a branch that kind of comes down, and I'm not sure I should add that. It's like, it might be natural, it might be real, but I think it might kind of go against the flow of our painting. So yeah, I'm looking for opportunities of things I can add, but also trying to be careful, make sure it makes sense if I'm gonna do it. I'm using some light blue up in here. This area, it's layered over a lot of green, so the end result, it still looks pretty green. But I just want to give some hue variation up here. I think that is something very beautiful in nature, especially in plants and foliage. You get all these different blues and greens, slightly different hues because the sun is bouncing off the leaves or going through the leaves, or you have blue bounce light from the sky, and it's just so many different scenarios. So when you look at one plant, even if technically the leaves have pretty much the same color everywhere, as far as the true color of the leaf, how everything appears can be really different, and you can see a lot of the different shades. And I think that's beautiful. So sometimes I take liberties and add colors that aren't really there just to make it feel nice, This area. Okay, so in the photo, there's a couple branches that are bending down at a pretty harsh angle. And I feel like I'd like to add a little hint of one of those. I just don't want it to stand out in a really crazy way. Look at this brush. When this brush is dry, it looks really wild. This is the Rosemary & Co. Extended Point brush. This is nice for making some thin lines and things. You can see once I wet it, it looks like this. So you can see a lot more the purpose of it. It's nice because it'll hold a lot of paint here still. So it'll hold a lot of paint, but it'll create a thin line. So this can be really useful for painting like longer lines, longer thin lines. So this is number 4. I actually have one smaller size I think I'm going to use for this. Number 2. I've had these 2 brushes for quite a long time, and they were definitely a good investment. I've used them a ton for like grasses and long, just long branches, things like that. So there's a lot of different similar types of brushes that will do this job, but just pointing out this is one that I like, and there's it's definitely a tool to look for. If you don't have something for that purpose, it can make it really a lot easier when you need to do that kind of thing. So I'm going to figure out what color, and then we're going to kind of drag down here, and I think it might be best to make it pretty much green. Maybe we'll add a little bit of brown, because I just don't want it to stand out too much. I do think it's needed compositionally to point our eyes down here. I just don't want it to go too harsh. It's gonna be where these leaves are coming off of. Oh, that's very transparent. Let's get a couple more. So they're like being weighed down, these branches. There's a couple kind of working like that. So maybe now it would fit in for me to add that one that was on this side. So something like that. And I think we need another branch here. I want an upward branch coming out of that little grouping. We are going to paint over this area a little bit more with leaves, so hopefully it'll cover up some of the awkwardness. Okay, I think I like that. Just add a couple more. A tiny little bit of magenta. I'll just pull that up and paint some green over top of it. Maybe let's take a look together. So I was a little having trouble committing to some of these branches, so they're kind of light. But I think that's okay. We're gonna add some of these darker greens, just a few here to get that contrast. And I also want to do the reverse here and bring some of these light greens up into here. So we're zoning in on this area, which is like sort of our focal area. Right now it feels like this is the focal area, but we're gonna add a little bit more action here and we'll see how that goes and how that changes things. So might indeed be getting closer to using a smaller brush again for some of those tiny details. I'm gonna keep the paints wet. All right. So let's come with our darker green, kind of a gray green. Got some magenta mixed in. Darken the area on the trunk here and kind of lead into these leaves. Same thing as before. And focus on brush strokes that kind of give a hint of bark texture. Just a little bit of striping. And I'm going to focus around these branches. If it's too dark, I'm kind of second guessing some of these. I'm going to take a little tissue and just tap lightly, just maybe bring up some. Yeah, use some of that lighter green. And this is where these two can interact a little bit in the corner. Right, starting to feel, I think, starting to feel more natural. Down here, still need some work. Slowly making my way towards that. Let's actually get some of this light green. And I want to add a couple little leaves. And you know what, actually, let's grab some yellow. Bring down some highlights. Trying to keep the shapes organic and just kind of, I don't want to make like perfect little circle dots. I kind of want a little bit of a random shape. Okay, so I'm gonna go anywhere we have that rim lighting, like maybe even in the edge of this one, add a couple highlights there. I love adding the highlights. It can be a little scary sometimes. I feel like I'm holding my breath trying to figure out where to put these, but it's very satisfying. It's fun to see the lighting come together, and the highlights are always a really fun part to do. All right, I think I'm going to take a moment away from that. I'm going to work here on some of the midtones and darker color greens. Just want to add a little next detail here. So we've got this darker layer, so let's add in between there some mid-tone greens. Here with them kind of going off into the blue shadows again. It's getting a little darker and a little more towards like a blue teal color. Especially on the path. Alright, so I've got to break up that hard edge just a little bit more organic on this side. Like some blue greens over here. I say blue greens, it's not extremely blue, but just relatively to the other greens. These are looking a little bit more blue to them. So I want to bring some tiny little plants coming up out here. So I'm going to try again with the leaf green, the yellow, and the white, and a little bit of water. I don't want to use much water because I don't want this to be very transparent. Try again. Just not thin enough. Need to go with the extended point brush. Now I've got to do a bit of work there because it's sort of messed up, but nothing too terrible. We can make this work. And we can also paint some teal back in. Try to mix up a color similar to that background. And I'm just gonna paint in around here. Okay, I think that's gonna be fine. So I've dried this area with the hair dryer, and I feel like the color that it dried is still a tiny bit too dark. I would like to lighten it up a little bit, so I'm going to use a lighter blue, water it down a bit. We're just going to go for it. This is a pretty transparent mix, so even though it might look too bright right now, this is just a thin layer. I think that fixes it. So I'm going to try to learn from my mistakes here. This area right here, I feel like it's just these plants. I think it's a little too far away for the amount of detail I was trying to put there, and the size of my brushes and everything. It didn't look great, and I'm afraid if I try it again, we might end up in the same exact place as we were before. I'm still going to add highlights there, but not going to go overboard. So here we go. Just a couple little details coming up over the ending of the shape there. And then we can also have sort of the reverse and maybe put a couple coming down from the branches. So I'm adding some shadows here, but I'm trying to keep them relatively subtle. I'm using a lot of water, and I'm not making them very, dramatically dark. Just a little bit, just to add some detail there. Thinking what to do. I might add some highlights coming here out above this darker area. Maybe when this is dry, I could add some little hints of like lighter leaves, like with when I say lighter, I mean this is very dark, so just a little bit lighter, just so that we can see that there's stuff going on here, just little hints of it. So we're looking at very finishing touches now, but those are the kind of things that I have in mind. All right, so a little bit more leaf green. Got some white still here. Okay. And I'm gonna try just couple little leaves catching the light there. It just adds like a little bit of glitter, you know? These random little pops of light. Just a little bit of glitter to the scene. Do that up here too. Okay, so let's switch gears. We're gonna do some shadow details now. I'm gonna take this green, bring some magenta. I also have this aqua color. Let's see what we get. I think that's gonna be okay. So put in some organic shapes. I'm just kind of making like some little blobs and lines, and you know, I'm keeping organic shapes in mind, but this isn't exactly painting individual leaves, you know. It's more blobby, kind of blobby leafy shapes. But using a color that's a little bit lighter and a little bit more blue really helps it look like reflected light bouncing off of foliage. You know, you just kind of, your brain just kind of assumes what it is, even though it's not exactly perfectly illustrated. And also do some of that over here on the other side. There's not a lot of room. But there's a weird little gap up here. Just gonna fill that in. Oh, it's getting so close. I want to use this color that we were using down here and use it to hint at some leaves within the shadow areas up at the top too. Because I feel like we're kind of having that thing here where it looks like all the leaves are like behind the tree trunk and branches, if that makes sense. I want to bring some leaves in front because that would be more natural, you know? So like this. I do feel like maybe that color was a little too bluish, so just adding some brown, kind of trying to warm it up a bit. But yeah, I think that's making this feel a little thicker and like there's more leaves coming in front of the tree trunk. Only sad thing is I think maybe I closed off a couple too many highlight areas. We can always pop a couple back in. But right now I'm just trying to assess the values in this and see if there's any places that need a slightly darker detail. And for me, what's standing out is these branches up here that get a little further away. I do think I need to randomly, you know, they don't all need to be super dark. but there can be some that are more illuminated, you know, than others because the sun could be shining through another branch and hitting it, or another one could be in shadow. So I just feel like I'm gonna add some random little shadows. And another thing that can be done is, see this area where there's like some of the pure white showing through, could get the white gouache and add a couple white highlights coming through the center here, which I think kind of like leads up. Right now it feels like this area is very interesting. This area is bulky. This is the part in the painting process where I feel like it's good to persevere, because technically it could be done here. I feel overall fairly happy with it, but I want to push it a little bit further and see if we could do something better, and I think it's going to be worth the effort. So let's do it. Let's get some of this leaf green, and we're going to add just a few of these little highlights back in. So they're very, very random. So I don't want to put them all the same distance from each other. We'll just cluster a couple here, and then a couple there, a couple there. That might already be enough. Just wanted to break that bulky area up. Maybe one more here. Up here, the top, we're adding some highlights. Okay, so we want this, I want to trail up here. So just a couple. But yeah, I do think it's nice to have a couple of those little white spots. Oops, that was a big chunky one. Maybe a couple here. Just, if anything, these could be like highlights on the leaves, catching the brightest light there. Kind of want to commit to at least one bigger area of white, so I think I'm gonna do it here. Right, I think it kind of makes sense. Kind of feels like the light's shining down as we're creating this here. But I better stop before I get too carried away. So I'm just about at the end, just looking around the painting and seeing where we last need any finishing touches. So I'm kind of just going on instinct, and like something's pulling me over here, like this needs a little bit more weight to it. So just adding a little bit more of these darker bluer green leaves over here. Kind of need something similar over here, I think. Only thing left that's still bothering me is this area here. It's too much like sort of a matching thing going on with this branch here and then that one. Kind of trying to change up the shape a little bit, maybe like bulk that one up a bit. If I can, I'm gonna sneak some last highlights to break up this right here. And at this point, I might be getting to the point of being too nitpicky, so. All right, so let's just take a look. So this area is not very detailed at all, but I kind of feel like that's okay. So we have a lot of other stuff to look at. I guess what's bothering me is my eye is kind of sticking here. I don't know if that's just me. Sometimes when you've been looking at a painting for a long time, you don't really see it properly anymore. You know, it's good to take a break and come back and then see if you're really having the same kind of response to it. But I feel like maybe there was just a little too much after all, a little too much value, darker value there. Because I think that might be better. We are pretty much at the tape peel, the best part. So I'm going to use the hairdryer. What I usually do is just put it on a low heat setting, but just warm up the edges of the tape a little bit. It depends on, you know, how warm it is where you are. If it's already hot in the room, then it's probably fine. But yeah, sometimes, you know, you'll get your paper get a little rips or something like that where it peels off the paper. And one thing that helps a lot is to just heat up the glue of the tape a little bit before you peel. So I'm gonna do that, and then yeah, we'll see the finished one with the nice clean edges. So that brings us to the end of the painting. I really hope you guys like it. I hope you enjoyed watching the process. If you have any specific questions or any techniques that you'd like to have some extra attention paid to those in future videos, let me know, and I'll try to take that into account. But yeah, I had a good time. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.